much like this last bull run was very much about the main L1s and who's going to be the best. I think this next bull run really could be about L2s. And so now we talk about L2s and we have Polygon and we have Arbitrum, we have Optimism. The next person on that list is Base. So really,
welcome back everybody to another episode of WagmiTV. We have another good one for you today. We are talking all about the Base mainnet launch. So Coinbase is getting into the L2 market, and there's a lot of potential behind that. And so we're going to kind of dive into a little bit of the background, and then what we see is kind of the maybe short, mid, and long-term outlook, and what the actual market outlook looks like. I think Mato, turn over to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think the big news, as Sia mentioned, right, Base has really opened its doors to developers who can now begin tinkering with the code on Base ahead of really a public launch that's slated for early August. Couldn't find an exact date on that, so post it below if you all know what the exact date is. But for those who are unaware, Base, as Garcia just mentioned, is a layer 2 network that's built on top of Optimism's OP stack. It's a modular open source framework, really allowing developers to deploy customized layer 2s. So as we kind of talked about, several tools are already live on Base's network to support builders, things like node providers, wallet infrastructure, block explorers, and developer tooling. And of course, Base has said it believes that builders on Base will create the next generation of products that bring 1 billion users on chain. So I think that's the big thing we wanted to talk about today. Right before we even hopped on, we were talking about various L2s, what the difference is with Base. Are they a little bit behind in this, or do they have maybe an upper hand because of Coinbase? So I guess I want to pause there. Evan, do you maybe have anything to add to that as far as the news goes, and then maybe to bring us into the next topic here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple interesting things about this, especially with Coinbase entering the L2 scaling space. They're partnering with Optimism here to really help, be the core developers on this OP stack. And like you said, Mata, this is one of those, pieces of technology where you can plug and play like your own L2 optimistic scaling solution. And so I think that's huge, having that Optimism partnership obviously creates a lot of trust in the space, because you want to be able to enter this market with a trusted, advisor like Optimism. So that's huge. The other part that I think is pretty big is in these L2s, you see a lot of people basically having large grant programs to fund developer projects, and basically, companies wanting to switch over to a new L2 like Base. And so I think Coinbase will be pretty solid in this as well, because they've got a ton of money backing. They're able to dish out these grants to developers that really want to grow the Base L2 network. So yeah, I think it's interesting. They are a little late. We already see Arbitrum having close to 2 billion in TVL. I think Optimism, Polygon, a few other ZK rollups are pretty close behind them in the TVL charts when you look at DeFi Llama. So they're a little late to that, but I think they bring a lot more to the table than some of these other players. So yeah, I don't know. Those are just kind of my initial thoughts, but interested to hear what you guys think about Coinbase joining the L2 race.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think the biggest advantage they have is kind of the runway, right? I mean, they have so much funding. They've had a corner on the U.S. market for so long. Their network is really, really wide. I think the biggest, I mean, they're a little bit. I mean, short term they're late to the game. Long term, I mean, L2s have not been around for very long. So I think if they have more of a long term view, I think that they're just on time. But in terms of adoption, obviously we have Arbitrum, Polygon, a lot of these L2s that have had heavy adoption. But again, going back to the other point, we've actually seen that shift pretty quickly. Essentially on a dime, right? Within a period of weeks or months. So it wouldn't be surprising if Base really gets this right and, it works out that we see a shift in TVL to what the most preferred L2 is. And maybe that will be Base. But I think the biggest, upside they have or strength that they have is kind of them being Coinbase overall, right? So I think that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, I guess from that perspective, I love the idea. I didn't even think about like runway, right? I mean, they have a lot of funding that they can kind of push towards this. Uh, One area that I guess we had kind of the same consensus was their NFT marketplace as well, which ended up not doing as well. But as we know, NFTs in general kind of went downhill. I think much like this last bull run was very much about the main L1s and who's going to be the best. I think this next bull run really could be about L2s. And so you think about that, where you had last bull run, you had Solana, you had Cardano, you had ETH, of course, you had Polygon, or not Polygon, you had, I guess, Cardano. I think I already said that. We had so many, right? And so now we talk about L2s, and we have Polygon, and we have Arbitrum, we have Optimism. The next person on that list is Base. So really, are they late to the game? I don't know if we can really say that yet. And I love the idea of, okay, they have a lot of this runway. I think the other piece that I really do love about this is, and it's something that we've talked about a ton about projects in the past, is how do we get people over to a Web3 environment without them feeling like they're in a Web3 environment? And I feel like Coinbase is very much positioned to do that, because they do have a lot of retail that is interested and is aware of who Coinbase is, right? If you ask a normal Joe Schmo on the street about Arbitrum or even about Polygon, they will not know what you're talking about, right? So if you ask them about Coinbase, maybe they would. And so they have an advantage from that aspect of being able to pull some of these people who maybe aren't as involved in the Web3 space over into that as well. So I think there's a couple really good bonuses for them, like anything, and especially like the L1s that we talked about all of last year. It's really going to come down to, how do you attract the developers to your chain versus all of the others? So I don't know if you all have a certain opinion on that. Evan, I know you were mentioning Optimism kind of had a different strategy than Arbitrum did. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, so we saw Arbitrum come to the market where they basically allowed any developer to launch contracts, dApps, whatever you want, on their network, where Optimism took a very different approach. They whitelisted, they made people request access to the network and then launch on there, which, could be the reason why we see less TVL and Optimism than Arbitrum. But I think we also see Optimism maybe as a more trusted provider for an L2 scaling solution than Arbitrum because of that, which, could be the reputation that Coinbase and Base is trying to work with as well. So, I think that's pretty interesting. And I think Base will move along the lines of Optimism, where they're going to make people either whitelist or do some type of certification or verification to launch on there. I know you can currently launch your smart contracts on there. And so that's something that, maybe I have that wrong. Maybe they will take an Arbitrum approach to it. But yeah, it's interesting because I think with a lot of these L2 scaling solutions, the biggest problem for them is getting people to bridge that Ethereum over to the L2 scaling solution. And like you mentioned, Mata, Coinbase really has outstanding user experience, some of the best you're going to see in crypto. And we could see Coinbase bring that type of UX to the L2 arena. Maybe that's their area where they think they can outperform these other two L2 scaling solutions, whether it's directly within the Coinbase app, maybe within the Coinbase wallet app, or maybe they do something entirely different. So I think there's a lot of avenues for Coinbase to kind of outmaneuver in the UX side and, hopefully bring a ton of new users to the L2 space that just, haven't had that chance to interact with these scaling solution and the low fees, which we all love, yet. So, it could be pretty interesting down the road once Base starts to mature a little bit.
Yeah, I think to your point earlier, Ev, it's gonna be interesting to see what their go-to-market strategy is and how they're gonna attract developers. Like I think the Arbitrum route of just opening it up and letting everyone come in it's a very, very confident strategy, because that tells people like, hey, come build, like we're ready for you, like it's gonna be a good experience, right? And I think if Base takes that approach, obviously it's gonna need to be a good experience for developers to come over. But I think that's where this is all going to kind of culminate into whether or not this is going to be successful, is if they can kind of get those developers easy and over, and then ultimately users and TVL coming to follow those developers. So I think it's a great point, Ev.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll see, less kind of trashy yield farms on Base. I think that's something that you see in these L2 spaces is, these yield farms will be hot for a month or, a couple months, and then those yields decline. So, yeah, hopefully Coinbase is doing this to, create projects and help facilitate projects that are going to, grow the space and not just kind of pump and dump. So we'll have to see, though. Who knows?
Awesome. Well, I think that does it for us today. As you can tell, everyone in this group is excited to see what actually happens. I think competition's only good for the space, right? If Base doesn't perform the way that it's supposed to, or the way that people expect, it's only more fuel for Arbitrum, Polygon, Optimism, all these other folks, right? And so I think it's gonna be interesting to see where this turns out. Obviously, we're gonna be following it, and definitely let us know your thoughts. And like Mata said before, if you do know the date and for some reason we're just missing it, let us know in the comments. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think Base will be an L2 contender into the future. So if you found this helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next week, everybody, WagMe.